do it. The moment you bring out a couple extra chairs, somebody else should.
Yep.
All right. Welcome to the Essex Junction Trustee meeting.
And to the Selectboard meeting, and I will call the May 14th, 2018 Selectboard meeting to order.
The same with the trustees, please join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome everybody, and if you haven't signed in, please do so.
If you have your cell phones, if you could put them to silence or at least buzz, that would be greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Okay. And I think we are going to, do we have any agenda additions, Evan?
Just one, it was emailed to you electronically, but it's comments from trustee Andrew Brown that would go with the reading file, item 7A.
Okay, great, thank you. And I note that trustee Andrew Brown and trustee Lori Houghton have both said they're going to be a little late tonight. They should be coming in soon. And so we will, do I hear a motion to amend the trustee agenda with the addition that came in late?
So moved.
Okay, do I hear a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
Okay. We need to do the same for the Selectboard, so I entertain a motion to include 7A. Is there any other changes that we make?
I would like to ask to rearrange some of the items under item 6. Just because when reading the documentation, it feels to me like a more logical progression would be to take the bottom 4 topics, D through G, and rearrange them a little bit, and I'd like to suggest the following rearrangement. So after A, B, and C, if we could discuss letter G, and then F, and then D, and then E. It just felt a little more logical to do them that way.
Okay.
Okay, so we have the changes for the Selectboard agenda is to add Andrew Brown's email for 7A, the reading file, and then to modify the agenda so that we go A, B, C, then G, F, D, E. I have a motion for, right? Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
That's good.
So moved.
Thank you. I have a second. Irene, okay, any further discussion on amending the agenda? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And do I hear a motion to make the same amendment to the trustee agenda?
Ooh.
With your second. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, that's passed. Good, thanks. And you know, there's a lot of items on the agenda, so if we still get a little mixed up and confused, which is extremely likely, at least from my perspective, just let me know if something's not clear. So we have no presentation, so I think we can move right on to public to be heard for any questions or, is that correct?
Yep.
Okay. So I would invite, I think what we'd like to do, Max and I discussed it, what we'd like to do is any comments that anyone has now would be welcome, or questions that are not on the agenda. And then I think if we could go through, sort of halfway through the joint meeting agenda, and we'll take a break at D, and I will, or Max will both ask if anyone has any questions about anything that's transpired so far, any comments, any statements, because I think it'd be a little difficult to go have public commentary after each one of these. We don't want this to go over, into tomorrow. So I think we'd like to do that, and I think it would be more efficient. And also, you might hear someone say something that you're thinking of saying. So, is that okay with everyone? Does that make sense? And then at the very end, we will also then have a public to be heard session too. So we'll make sure we have ample opportunity for public comment. But there are a few sort of business-like things we want to move through and get through too, if that's okay.
So just clarification, you were saying that somebody said a comment and somebody else wants to speak next and agrees with that comment, to just say, I agree with the prior.
Yes, please. Yeah, Andy.
So do we have any are there likely gonna be any motions put forward in the first 3 or 4 items?
Yes, I believe there would be.
So then we're not gonna take any comment until after we've gone through and
Well,
actually approve motions without any comment?
Well, up to D, because I think if we look at them, I mean, for example, item A is really a question for the select board and trustees to determine in terms of the manager's goals. If someone has a comment about it at that point, but you want to allow that? Or you want to have?
I would
You
do
do?
so, yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Before any motion, I think we need to be able to take.
Okay, that's a little different than our routine, but that's, you know what, it's a joint meeting, let's do it. Okay. Okay, then you want to have joint, so you would like to have public comment after each one of these, is that what you're saying?
Any one that's likely gonna end up with a motion that we need to consider, I think we need to consider a public input.
Okay, I just don't know, I can't guarantee you that we're gonna have it, yeah.
I understand. I think before we pose a motion.
Okay, well, if someone has a comment or a question, then I guess we can just be very open about it and say, if someone has a comment, then raise your hand and we'll recognize you. Does that sound okay? Is that good?
As a practice, the select board will have the discussions, and then before a motion is put forth, then that's the time
Okay.
to have it. Because once a motion's on the floor, typically, our practice is to not take any more.
Sounds good. Let's do it that way. Okay. All right, so we won't do that, and but then the next step would be to have an open, a couple of minutes for any questions or comments from the public on something that's not on the agenda tonight. Anyone out there want to make a statement or comment or a question about something that's not on the agenda tonight? Okay, seeing none, we will proceed.
Right.
The first order of business, the select board will indulge the trustees. We have an amendment to the village's open burn and enforcement ordinances. And Evan, I'm gonna hand it over to you very briefly to sort of go through this. if that's
Do you
okay.
have the new language in?
Yes, we do.
So you have the new language in the packet?
Yes.
At the last village board meeting, there was, except I'm the only one that doesn't have language.
I can read it.
Okay, if you don't mind, well, I'll give you the synopsis. We had the ordinance language, and there was a comment from Irene Renner, who was in the audience, to take a look at the language and use of some of the words. So we went back to the interim village attorney, and I believe it was today, he provided some new language. So we have that new language in your memorandum, and if you are in agreement of that language and approve the ordinance, it will go into effect 60 days thereafter.
Well, let me read the new language, and this is section 1302, open burning. In the municipal code, the village's municipal code, chapter 13, regulation of public nuisance, and I'm not gonna read the entire ordinance, but the new language includes leaves cannot be burned, and the restrictive language is, quote, in no circumstance shall an otherwise permissible fire be allowed that creates, in the discretion of the village or its designate, a public nuisance, end quote. That's the revision. And then the other piece that we really wanted to get to was to put a little bit more teeth in the existing ordinance. And so the fines, the first violation would be zero, there would be no fine, it would just be a warning. The second offense would be a $250 fine. Third offense would be a $500 fine. And fourth and subsequent offenses would be $750. So for trustees, I think we mostly got through this. I think we gave the nod to the whole concept. So this is just sort of tidied up a little bit. And so the decision for the Board of Trustees, I have the wording right here, but
Take it right here.
yeah, you got it, Dan, go ahead and read it.
Well, basically, it's right on our amended, I believe.
I recommend that trustees amend chapter 13 regulation of public nuisance and chapter 9 enforcement as recommended by the unified manager, interim village attorney, and fire chief.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Okay, we're done with that. Thank you, folks. Yeah. And so now we are on to the joint meeting with the Essex Selectboard.
All right.
And I'll let you do the first one next.
Okay, item 6A is to determine goals and evaluation process for the unified manager. We've discussed this actually many times. But what we need to do is have these goals in place in time for our next joint meeting, June 14th, to approve. In our homework, we made a number of suggestions on how to define these goals. And in order to get them to a point where we can review and approve, there's a recommendation that we form a working group of 2 to 4 members from our group to propose the goals and objectives, as well as the evaluation process, and then bring that back to the boards for review and approval. So, anyone want to start the discussion?
Yeah, I mean, I think that what the issue that I understand it for the 2 boards is that we generally accepted the ICMA evaluation format in their language as that would sort of be the base. And then we also said there would be for the manager 3 goals to be achieved, specific goals to be achieved by next February. And the nature, we've had different ideas about what those goals should be. Should they all be, should there be 6, should there be 5, should there be 3? How many should there be? Obviously, we need a reasonable number, an achievable number. And it was also put forth that maybe one concept would be to have one mutually agreed upon goal, and then each of the boards assign a village-specific goal and a town-specific goal. But I think those are the questions that would be addressed by a subcommittee. I think that would be the idea, that the subcommittee would wrestle with these questions and look at the definition that we put in for, is it SMART, I want to say?
Yes.
SMART. And the acronym for that, and SMART goals. And then, given those different parameters, come up with a recommendation on behalf of both boards that they would give to us in June. It's a fairly short time frame, but does that sound right?
Right.
And so what we'd like to do is to find a subcommittee who would work on that, and I think I don't know if that's reasonable. We could do it ourselves, but we kind of thought that maybe a subcommittee of 2 of each board members working on this could probably meet 1 or 2 nights and make short work of it and come back with a recommendation. Does that sound reasonable?
During the day, whenever.
Anytime, that would be up when they meet, and how many would be there at their discretion.
Now, these subcommittees, when they meet, it would be warned, even though it's not a quorum of any one board. But to make sure that the public is fully made aware, we want to make sure that they're all subcommittee leaders are.
I think we have a little bit of a difficulty because 2 of the trustees are missing, and I'd like to nominate one of them.
I think that's
You
a
wanna
great
do that?
idea. I think that's what we should be doing.
Can I just ask a quick
Yeah.
question? I think we may come out of tonight's meeting with more than one working group identified.
Yes.
And so I'm questioning whether we need to have 4 board members, maybe just one from each board, just to spread the work a little. I just curious whether anyone thinks that's too.
Thoughts? Agree?
As long as the committee is made up of equal numbers of people from each district or not yet identified district, I'm fine with however many we decide.
If I can, let me just quickly look ahead and anticipate maybe a couple of what some of the other committees might be, so we can get a sense of that, okay? If I look at I kind of thought that looking at all the words and defining the words around governance, that might be something that some small subgroup could be, and again, not a lot of people, but one trustee, one selectman would work on that. There might be top 3 priorities to be for consolidation. And these are things that we've submitted, these are ideas that we've submitted, so a lot of this would just be wordsmithing, consolidating all those. So there might be, so I'm anticipating there'll be probably 2, maybe 3 other small subcommittees. So do we want them to just to be 2 people, 4 people? Is that right? Is that the
I
decision?
personally would rather see at least 2 from each to get balanced, and I don't think these are gonna take a lot of time
Okay,
Okay,
to do. It's
Just a
gonna take
suggestion.
several meetings.
okay.
And then I guess at the end, when we see all the committees, and it looks like it is too much burden for, maybe we can come back and see which of those committees maybe we could relax.
Okay.
Um,
okay.
Does anyone have any comments about, let's go through the first one. Anyone have any?
I'm not in favor of forming subcommittees to do a lot of this work. I think we should work together as a large group and work through these. I also don't want to commit myself to more meetings. So I will not volunteer for any of these subcommittees you're
Okay.
proposing tonight.
Okay. I think, the idea is that we need to we've been talking about the manager process and just getting through it. We need to have some kind of a firm decision by June, which is a few weeks away.
So, okay, I'll back off a little. Okay, I'm fine with, right, somebody else proposing the evaluations scheme that we use for our municipal manager.
Okay.
The ones around governance, I'm not interested in participating. Actually, I don't want to do the other one either, but my greater objection is for the ones around governance. I think we should work on that as a larger group.
Okay. Well, why don't we see if we can get through the first, let's get through the first one anyway. See, if we nominate a subcommittee to put this evaluation process together and get back to us by June.
Yeah, again, in our homework, people have suggested what it is that they want to see for goals. So it would be just this small group to be able to assimilate those into a proposal then to bring forward.
Yep.
So they wouldn't really be creating new ones per se.
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, I completely understood the homework and didn't, what I did is, okay, we have this handbook for the evaluation of municipal manager, which has a list of goals in it. I wrote those ones down because we've already approved those ones.
Yeah, and that's sort of a management piece, and then there
Yeah.
was a goal piece, right? There's sort of 2 parts to the evaluation, and that manual sort of focuses on the management piece.
Right, so I misunderstood the homework assignment and did not reach forward to other goals. I mean, we have, the select board has, the last time we had a goal working session was September of 2015, so they're pretty stale. And so I would have thought that we maybe could have had it's too late now to bring it up, but I guess a goal session before, tying them to, I understand there's a bonus involved with it,
Yes. Yep.
which I just heard of today.
Well, that's in the contract.
Yeah, it's a contract which everybody
I
had a
know,
copy
but
of. Everybody had a copy of
yeah,
it.
okay, I guess I didn't read it. I'll confess I didn't read it.
That's
guess.
okay, Andy.
I'll go see if I can find it. I'm not sure I have one, but I'll look.
Well, and as far as, I don't think anyone, so I personally thought your homework responses were great. So everybody, had some gaps there. No one did a perfect job. No one gets an A+, so I wouldn't worry. I think the thing is, though, my response is, in terms of the select board's goals, is that we kind of are in our uncharted territory in the sense that the trustees might also have some goals. And it could be profoundly time-consuming for each board to assign all of their own goals. So we were trying to come up with some kind of a synthesis. I think that was the concept. Okay.
Might it be problematic if 1 or 2 people are assigned to a committee to condense these goals and yet there are maybe opposing goals or goals that people on the committee don't like, but it doesn't mean that they're necessarily bad goals. I mean, how do we tease that out if we don't talk as 9 people?
Well, one idea, or another idea, could be that we have, for the joint board's overall goal, and we had a big discussion last meeting about one that's in the future, becoming one municipality. What we could do is have that plus maybe 1 or 2 goals specific to the village, 1 or 2 specific to the trustees, or to the select board, but have, that defined, and we can discuss that and make sure that that's really our overall goal. And then it probably would be wise to say, Evan, here's our, joint vision here. What can you do to support that in the time we have, going forward? And then the subcommittee could work with him to make sure that those are consistent with, that overall goal that we set. Yeah?
Just going back to my previous career in goals and objectives are set annually. You're evaluated annually. When you're talking about obtaining a goal of a unified community, you're talking down the road, who knows how many years.
Right.
So to set a goal like that, we're talking about an annual evaluation of our manager. So why are we're evaluating on goals that are unattainable in the evaluating period? So that doesn't make sense to me. The other aspect of this that I'm a little concerned with, we look at goals and rewards or incentives or what have you for accomplishing tasks set out. But on the other aspect of that, what about disciplinary action? How do we treat that? How is that addressed in goals and objectives? And goals and objectives in evaluating someone, it should be done in a period so that it's not just we do it annually. We should have quarterly evaluations so that he's aware of his deficiencies, so it's not waiting until the end of the rating period to evaluate somebody and say, now you failed to do this, you failed to do that. It really needs to be very structured, and I think that there's a lot that needs to be looked at, and I'm just looking back on my experience from what I've had in my work.
Yeah. I just want to comment real quick.
Yeah.
My comment didn't mean that
Okay,
all that
okay.
work gets done this year. It's just that what pieces can get done this year which support that longer-term goal.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let me just interrupt here. Let's go back to understand what we have already agreed upon. We've already agreed upon and that we will do an evaluation in February. That's when the anniversary for the hiring is. And that we will use basically the ICMA format. We've agreed with that. And then in addition, we said there will be a bonus associated with the successful, or not successful, but the performance on some specific goals that are agreed upon by the 2 boards and the manager. So that's already set. I don't think it seems like you've got a pretty solid framework there already about what this task is, and now it's just sort of filling in some of the details. And I think the details really are more about the goals being directed towards the bonus that's going to happen in February. And I would also just add that we have to consider that Evan is handling 4 board meetings a month, plus a joint meeting every month, and has already set out a very ambitious schedule for aligning policies and practices. And so, we don't want to, on top of this, be adding a huge amount of work that needs to get done, I think. That's just my observation. Elaine?
Keeping in mind that we wanted to have SMART goals, which are specific, measurable, and achievable, and relevant, and time constrained. Out of all of the goals that folks submitted, including the ones that Andrew sent, in my opinion, the only one that is truly measurable is the first one you submitted, George.
Which is?
Which is alignment of town and village policies and procedures Aligning all policies and procedures would not be achievable within the remaining years, so I believe Evan should designate a specific cohort to be aligned.
Okay.
Everything else in this document that folks submitted is, with the exception of Andy's really excellent list, which is already included in the evaluation, are aspirational and somewhat prescriptive and more guidance. I can't measure whether Evan uses his gifts or whether, I can't measure whether, well, and there's a lot in here that are very subjective. I would rather look at the plan that Evan submitted to us for alignment and choose some goals from that, because Evan has already put a great deal of thought into what he thinks his work plan's gonna be for the next year. And perhaps we could just put 2 or 3 of those as the goals, because then we can specifically say, is this 40% completed? Is it 100% completed? And we will have a measure. Everything else in here feels really subjective and difficult to measure.
smart.
And that's
That's
why
right.
I go back to the whole issue of having a subcommittee, because it seems like this could be something, this isn't something that we could probably get through tonight. We
Right.
could, but then we would not be able to get through anything
Use up
else.
whole list.
So assigning a subcommittee to go through the very stuff that you're talking about and see what they come back with in June, that might be the way to go here. It sounds like a subcommittee to me.
Hey,
Evan?
Would you like me to attend with the subcommittee?
Sure.
And also I would offer, if you want, the HR director, Travis, there. He had offered that if you'd like his services, he would attend.
I think that would be helpful, because it would help make these things that aren't SMART goals into that format, perhaps. That would be very helpful.
And maybe for trustee Karen, I like the idea of getting feedback during the year. I don't think it's fair either to an employee or anybody else that you wait for the day that their evaluation is and any monies associated to tell them they're not, living up to what you're expected. So any feedback, whether it be quarterly, semi-annually, would be appreciated. And one of the comments that I made to the chairs today was, I'd be happy to do, I hope you can hear me, I'd be happy to do a 6-month update or something close to that, in February, and maybe take it out 6 months and do an update, but, it's not like also we don't work together all the time, but, that type of thing is appropriate. And whether there's 3 goals or 5 goals, as long as they are somewhat tied to the main mission of what you guys are trying to achieve. So if the town and the village have top priorities, those should be at the top of my list. And so whether it is downtown development or the Essex Center plan, or we have staffing issues that need to get through, and I still have a lot of people to meet and get to know about operations and how people feel, et cetera, those things can't always be quantified, but you can say, hey, we have pushed the ball this far, and this is, but I would say that also, don't tie things to approvals by a board that I'm not responsible for. So if we bring things forward to you from a staff perspective, and you work on them, but you don't approve them, it has nothing to do with whether I brought them to you or not. Now, what level I brought them to you and whether you felt they were ready for action, that's different than that. So I would just suggest that you can put those in as goals. You just have to be cognizant that some of those processes may take well over a year. Alignment is gonna take, but the question is, how far did we get? Is the plan right? Is the ball moving in the right direction? So I offer that, be happy to sit on those, and have staff, Travis join us in.
So can we move on to a designation of a subcommittee? And I think for this one, we'll say 2 people from each board. Is that reasonable? All right?
Depends on who they represent.
Do we have volunteers?
I would, Mr. Chair, but the month of June, I am I would not be able to give it the attention that it needs or deserves. So I'm gone for 2 weeks on vacation.
We have nothing, what's left of May as well,
Right, we do.
just saying.
I'm just saying, I would love to, but I cannot in good conscience.
Okay.
I also,
Can we
I
text
would
Lori and
offer,
Dan? Can we text Lori and Dan?
Lori, Andrew.
Or Andrew?
Sure, I'll go, I'll hear a nomination for
I'm sorry.
Lori and Andrew.
Can always be amended later.
Yeah, we can amend it later.
So, Irene, is this something you'd be interested in?
It is, I'd also wonder if we can involve members of the public who would be interested in this.
Well, the subcommittee meetings will be warned, and public comment should be taken.
But you don't want the public on it.
Right, we're gonna have 2 and 2, and the staff is the, is.
For an evaluation of the town manager?
To establish.
They pay his salary.
Yeah, but they're not sitting board members. I mean, the manager is, we manage the manager, and I think that we should be the ones who decide what the evaluation should be. Don't you think?
Just asking.
Okay.
But I think public comment should be part
Sure,
of
of
each
course.
subcommittee. So, did you say you would be
I
willing?
would be willing.
And did I hear that Lori and Andrew?
Well, why don't you do your select
Aye.
board first?
Fine, I'm up.
Yeah,
And he doesn't want to, it doesn't really,
okay, so maybe
doesn't
we
really
can,
leave a choice.
thank you, Mike. Okay, so it looks like we have Irene and Mike, thank you.
Okay, appreciate it. And do we want to nominate to promote Andrew and Lori, and then we can.
Actually, based on their experience and what they do, I
Yeah.
think they'd both be excellent
Okay.
choices for the
Let's do
committee.
it. So we don't- good. Done.
Don't worry, we'll get
Well,
on too.
Andrew, you're on,
Congratulations, Andrew.
You should stay.
Andrew, you're on a committee, we just put you on the committee.
Figures.
You're on a manager evaluation committee. We'll fill you in later. We're thinking only like 15, 16 hours. It's gonna- Okay, right?
It's gonna be great. We need a motion, right?
Okay, well, each board needs a motion.
Right.
Do we want to allow public comment before we put a motion on the
Of
table?
course.
Yep.
Is there anyone in the public would like to make a comment on what we just discussed about the manager's evaluation? Okay. Hearing none, then I would entertain a motion to appoint Irene and Mike to the evaluation process for the Unified Manager Subcommittee.
So moved.
Thank you, Irene. Do I have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion of appointing Irene and Mike to that subcommittee? Okay, hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion passes 5-0.
Okay, do I hear a motion to appoint Lori Houghton and Andrew Brown to the manager evaluation subcommittee?
So moved.
Do I hear a second?
I'll second.
Okay, can you second this out? Can you do that? Okay.
He didn't make the motion, he could second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Congratulations, Andy. Thank you. Yeah.
I will send out, we've been really starting use of doodle poll to find dates and times when people could make it, so this week you will be getting a doodle poll of possible dates.
Sounds good. And all I would say is be sensitive to Selectman Plagueman's
Absolutely.
busy schedule in June.
Oh, we're gonna try to get this done by the end of May.
Yeah, it'll be done. Okay, so do you want me to take the next one?
Sure.
Discussion about the trustee, select board, and staff work plans for alignment. And we can, should we do staff or trustees in select board first? What would be?
Well, let's see, what's on the thing? Let's do the trustee and select board one first.
Okay.
That's first on the agenda.
Okay. This, a lot of you, some had different comments, different ideas about this. And so I'd like to, I'll just sort of throw the floor open, I think, to all of us to have to discuss what you thought of the different plans for alignment. And this is, let's keep it in two sections. One is we want to make clear, one is the staff presented a whole sort of process for how they're going to approach alignment. But then the two boards also had some comments and thoughts for how to approach alignment.
Anybody want to go first? Elaine?
I'm just gonna throw out an observation that, the trustee/select board portion of the work plan depends heavily on opinions regarding governance. So I'm wondering if that's gonna end up getting combined into our conversation about general governance.
Yes.
That said, I thought that Evan's plan was terrific and ambitious. The plan for the staff
Okay.
is ambitious but manageable, and I'm all for it.
What about the trustee select board? So
I think that's gonna change and form so many times that I don't have a lot to say about it right now. Sorry. That's all right.
Yeah, I agree with Elaine. I couldn't really tell the difference between, some people sort of expressed ideas about what we should do, where we should go, and it wasn't, I didn't really see a clear delineation between board plans for alignment and board thoughts about governance
Right.
and how to proceed and discussion. So that was me, and if I missed or misunderstood what someone was saying, my apologies. But I said pretty much the same thing. I couldn't really tell. If you don't mind, I would take a moment, and I don't want to digress, but I did make a comment, and I will direct this to Irene and allow you to respond to Irene, but I know you've made multiple comments about representation. I started by going through the town charter, and the town charter has does not allude to a village. It does not allude to voting districts. The town charter simply says, all selectmen shall be elected at large, period. Subchapter 2, paragraph D. It doesn't refer to anyone who has special interests. I think I said in my comments to you that the village, citizens of the village who are citizens of the town, fully support with their taxes every single department, every single process that the town does, every single asset that is owned by the town, every shovel, every book, every library, every swimming pool, every single thing that the town owns, it was contributed to by the taxpayers of the village. There is not a process or department that the town operates that village taxpayers don't contribute to. And so I would say village taxpayers or your constituents who live in the village have a 100% interest in everything that the town does. And I can't really see a basis in law or in terms of finance for singling out some subgroup, any more than I would say if we locate 81 Main Street and the police department are located in the village, that gives the village people, because they're geographically located in this part of the town, some kind of a special interest. I think really what you're talking about are people who are not currently being taxed by the village to support village services. I think that's really more accurate description of what you're saying. Other than that, I don't really understand what you mean by a group of people who have a special or a separate interest in the citizens, all the citizens of the town. So I invite, that was my thought on it. Don't really know what else to say.
Okay, well, I would say we can look to the school district for a shining example, because they just merged, and yet they have set aside certain seats for the different geographic districts, because they're very different things going on. For example, there's busing outside the village, there isn't inside the village. There's a much more rural district outside the village. And so that they chose, when they merged the school district, to maintain those district origins of their board membership, even though the members vote at large on every single issue. And I think what we've seen over time is that actually there was an 8-cent highway tax charged only to outside the village residents for decades, which the village was not paying. So that is a group of assets that were paid for by people who do not live in the village. So I think it's problematic to say some of these statements that you said, because they're not true.
What statements did you say? Can you say what portion, what assets are owned by the town that the village did not contribute to?
Well, for example, the highways, as I said, the roads, but there's other things that have been problematic because we've had no representation. It hasn't even been a year since the question was asked by members of the outside the village district if they could somehow retain the dozens and dozens of acres the Essex Town School District owned at that time were about to be turned over to a merged district, and the town of Westford held an election to retain their land assets, and it passed, and they retained them. The village of Essex Junction held an election, retained the Park Street School at least, because their voters were allowed to vote on it. And when I brought up the question, it was shut down from many angles, including my own board, but also by the Essex Town School District, when I believe they should have been standing up for the people who owned those assets until July 1st of last year. So it's not just what is currently owned, it's a history that if you look back in time, there's been a lack of representation that has been problematic, and I would hope that we would be able to see not just what exists or what doesn't exist, but to look back in history and to see why, in fact, it's been so difficult to merge, and perhaps we'll see that that lack of representation, those extra charges for highway expenses, are part of a bigger picture of a lack of representation that we can now remedy by looking more broadly at what is and what should be, and make this aspirational, not just a continuation of the past, because we know the past has not always been successful when it comes to talking about combining things. And I believe the reason it hasn't been successful is we don't have equal teams at the table. We just set up a board with 3 village residents and 1 outside the village resident to evaluate the town manager's criteria. So to put forth criteria for the town manager's evaluation. So as many times as I say this, somehow it keeps happening. Time and time again, we have these committees of what I would call lopsided representation. Until we have equitable representation and we understand what that means, and then we make it happen, you're just perpetuating, everyone who doesn't pay attention to that is perpetuating this imbalance that will come back to bite us, because it continues to do so over time.
Okay, let me just go back. I just want, just for clarification, because
Yep.
I was in the room actually back in the 1990s. I remember the date when the Selectboard made a decision to impose the highway tax. And why did they do that? Because they looked at the taxes coming, the fact that the village was being taxed to support, purchase, build, plow, pave all of the town roads outside of the village. And the town was contributing $0 to do anything of that nature inside the village. 0. The village was contributing approximately half of the town's capital fund that repairs all the roads, pays for paving. The town was contributing no dollars from the town general fund coming back into the village. The select board at the time thought that that seemed a little unfair, which it wasn't just, and that was euphemistic, it was profoundly unfair. That's why they put in a highway tax. I would also go back to the question of what the school district did, which you just said. That's fine, but that's a charter they created. We can only go on the basis of the charters that exist. Right now, there's a municipal corporation called the Town of Essex, and every single person who lives in the Town of Essex is a shareholder in that municipal corporation. It's like Microsoft. If we all own shares in Microsoft Corporation, we all get to participate equally, or depending on our share, but we all get to participate in the Microsoft annual election. The fact that some of us might also own Apple stock does not diminish or in any way prevent us from if you own Microsoft, from participating in Microsoft shareholder elections. And really, that's the way the law looks at it. That's the way it is. We can't do anything else. To designate some other group is, in my view, not only unethical, but it's obviously illegal.
With the charters the way they are today.
The way that they are
But
today.
we've already put that in as some of the things we know we need to work on, which
Absolutely.
is perhaps districts or representation, as one of the things we're gonna work on. So the charters don't allow you to do that today, but that doesn't mean they can't be amended to allow you to do it in the future to take care of it. And we've
Absolutely.
already identified that
And-
many times.
And that's the point I was trying to make. The very thing that you're talking about, which is representation and from our perspective, unequal tax distribution, is the very thing that we're talking about. That's the essence and the substance of what we're trying to get at. And so I think it's important to say, let's get at it. Let's get on with the business of working at it. But I think bringing in some other group that the charter does not recognize, and the village charter certainly wouldn't recognize, I don't think that's appropriate. And just to keep trying to say that, I think it's sort of sidetracking us a bit. I think I'd rather see where we can go with this and see if we can't work this out.
I think we can if we don't put out misinformation. And when you say things in print like this, that there are no town assets and things like that, that have not been true over time and shouldn't be true today if we were paying attention to these things, I think we need to show greater awareness of the history here and talk more about how we're gonna change things to help the 11,000 people who live outside the village want to buy into this new vision, because otherwise they will be lost and they will set up their own overlay district perhaps and have their own board of trustees, which they're perfectly able to do. That's perfectly legal. The village did it 125 plus years ago. If the outside the village folks have to do that, maybe they will. I would hate to see that happen. I thought we were moving together. I'd rather not see
We are.
another layer of government. But if there's tone deafness in the boardroom to the plight of the actual majority of people living in the town over the fact that they can't get equal representation at any committee meeting where we're talking about this stuff, they aren't recognized when we ask, gee, can our assets be retained? Can we have a vote so the school district doesn't get them? Oops, sorry, no, you don't have representation, so you're not gonna get representation. That's not fair to them, and there's this series and this history of unfairness and speaking about the town outside the village as if it doesn't matter, and unless we give it weight in our conversations and talk about how it does matter and how it
I
will
get it.
matter, then I think
I
we're
get
setting
it.
ourselves up
I get it,
for
but you're
problems
conflating
in the
something that
future.
the school district does with what the two municipal governments do. And my point, this is very simple, Irene, is that folks out on Sand Hill Road, you've got constituents there, you've got constituents on Old Stage Road, and you've got 100 constituents in this building right here.
That's right.
And they are worthy and deserving of your representation as well.
They've
They
had
need
it.
100% of your representation
They've
as
had it.
well. That's all we're saying. I'm saying that on their behalf.
They've
Your
had it.
constituents in the village need your equal representation.
They've had it. I've done lots of tax equity stuff over time, but I haven't seen any representative equity in the last 5 years, and that's why I'm now talking on their behalf, because the tax equity's happening, the representative equity is not.
Okay. Let's see if, I thank you, and I didn't mean to, if I it gave offense, I didn't mean to.
Can we please just continue this conversation?
Absolutely.
And this is the 4th straight meeting, I believe, where we've had this conversation. So can we please stop talking about what's wrong and what we wish could happen and do the work, because we're actually working on it, and let's just keep moving, please.
When I see misinformation, I need to call it out. And that's the only reason I said it, because you highlighted it, and I want to make sure people don't walk away with the
I
impression
think there's
that there are no
disagreement as to whether
assets.
it's actually
see
misinformation
it as
more than opinion.
Okay, Andy.
There's still a little bit more than a penny of highway tax left, and
Right.
where does that money go, Evan? I think it goes to capital, right?
It goes to rolling stock.
Yeah,
Rolling
right,
stock,
so,
right.
so there you go. All the trucks that are run by the town highway department were paid for out of that tax that was only paid outside the village.
What percentage of the truck, out of a $100,000 truck, how much?
It's
of it
more
was
than
paid?
zero. You said zero, George, come on.
So I agree with Irene on this, that it is somewhat misleading to say that there are no assets. And it's a good point, because, right, a penny of tax, right, I haven't thought through, if you've got umpteen hundred trucks, how much of that was actually bought using the town outside the money highway, or town outside the village highway tax. I don't know, and I'm not gonna ask staff to go figure that out, but, I had the same concern. I wrote the note down here and I've already told Evan and Greg that when we set our tax rate, I'm gonna ask that we eliminate that highway tax altogether. I don't know why we have to continue it, but
I would just like to remind everybody that in Evan's recommended work plan for the staff, he suggests that that the staff continue to work on the public works alignment, which has to do with that highway tax because it funds rolling stock. And the recommendation from the committee that reviewed the public works consolidation was that we pay attention now to the finances behind, the revenue and expenses behind public works. And when that happens, we will have a very detailed explanation about where that highway tax is coming from and where it's going. But I also want to remind folks that when we shifted the public works budget from the village into the town, the way we offset the increase to town outside the village residents was to eliminate 6 cents of the 8-cent highway tax at the time. So we used that inequity to balance the books for both the residents in the village and the residents in the town outside the village. We did not want to hit the residents outside the village with a massive tax increase. So the way we solved that problem was to lower the highway tax. And so when we look at the public works consolidation in the future, hopefully very soon, we need to remember that there is that 1% or whatever's left of it, 1.1% left. That may be something that we can use to offset increases on the town outside the village side as we even out the expenses and revenues for public works. So I think that tax is very important.
It's a very good point, because I just wanted to stay on it a little bit. I don't want to belabor it, but again, we're from our perspective in the village, our capital fund that pays for all of our paving is 100% paid for by the village. That's all these streets out here that everybody drives on. We pay 100% of the cost, and we're also contributing approximately 50% of the cost for paving and maintenance of the streets in the town outside the village. So let's be clear about, when we talk about fairness, let's be really clear that we understand that there's different visions and different perspectives of fairness going on. And I think that was very important when we talked about equalizing the cost of now sharing the cost of taking care of all of the town's roads and making it equitable. The village wanted to make sure, and we were absolutely on board with the fact of reducing that highway tax and not saying as a way of offering the impact on town outside the village voters. So we were sensitive, and we have always been sensitive to that. We don't want to hit, and I've said it multiple times, and I think that's why the big work I see before us is how do we get over this tax equity business without hitting town outside the voters, outside the village voters, with a giant tax increase. We've been talking about that all along. That's the work. That's the hard work ahead of us, and we're very sensitive to it. Mike?
I ask that we move on, please.
Let's do it. Okay, so we would be then the next, does anyone from the audience, I guess we should ask for questions or comments?
Yeah, Johnny Egan.
Yes.
And I read something there when I was reading the minutes, and it was, I think it was a suggestion by Mike Flagman.
Yes, sir.
That there would be one 10-member select board made up of 5 at-large residents from the village and the town that serve staggered terms. And that seems to me to be excellent. You know, equal representation, staggered terms, and if we could get to that with the next charter change, we'd save a lot of energy and steam. You know, otherwise it looks like there's, from our perspective out here, it's a power struggle between individuals. And, you know, George, I agree that you know, with equal representation, that there can be good representation with things as they are, but the perception is that it's uneven.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just a perception, and that needs to be addressed and overcome.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the charter change to, you know, 5 and 5 would be good. There's going to be a lot of work to be done with this new board, and the more members, the better on it. And the chances with 10 people that they will be able to make decisions and not be in stalemate. I'm from the town, and you know, on the issue of the tax, I wholeheartedly agree there should be the same tax for in the village and outside the village. And I think it just simply, you know, just have it staggered over several years. I don't know, maybe 5 years. And I think people from the town, I think there's a good chance they could accept that, and it'll be a little each year. But I think there has to be that equality of payments. And I think there's got to be the one village, or the one Essex, I mean, the one Essex. And thank you.
Thank you, very
Thank
good
you.
comments, thank you. Rich, I don't have it here. Several people,
Jerry Fox. What this is all about is that the town's future is becoming the village. And the village's future is becoming the town. Because 25 years ago, there were a lot of farmers here who didn't need a water system and didn't need sewers. But everybody out there now needs water and sewers, just like the village has. So we need to take the long view. Someday, this piece of land that went to the school district is a recreation area, and it has forests. And someday, maybe 50 years ago, from now, maybe 100 years ago, there will be synergy in moving the forest of the village to the town, or the forest, the town to the village. I don't know what it's going to be, but there will be a time when there's synergy to bring those two together. It certainly is going to happen today, but it will someday. And we just need to have the long view and understand that all of these problems will, in time, find their own solutions.
thank you, Jerry. Thank you.
Iris Banks. So, George had said that there were no provisions in the charter for, needing to have representation by two different entities. But is there anything in the charter about consolidation? And if not, I feel that's pretty overarching new, concern that's happening, and maybe would merit kind of a revisit of, if that's not part of the charter too, there's no precedent for consolidation.
Yeah, I don't want to necessarily respond, and I invite anyone else on the select board of trustees to respond. There isn't anything in the charter, but there are state laws about, in the charter about merger or consolidation, but there are state laws that say what you have to do, what two communities need to do if they want to merge. There's a process laid out.
But you said there's no precedent in the charter, but yet now the state does have a precedent.
The state does have a precedent, but that's not something that would be, the charter just lays out the authority and the legislative authority of the charter. It doesn't really, it would be unusual for a charter to contain language of how it's going to dissolve itself, basically. I haven't seen that.
I guess my point is, that if this is it's going to necessitate a very big change.
Yes.
And that the charter couldn't have anticipated that.
No.
So that's why I'm feeling this needs to be considered.
Yep.
And also just a quick, I felt very marginalized at the last meeting of the select board as a resident of the town outside the village, in terms of, I know everyone's working on this, but I felt like a lot of ideas were just totally shot down without consideration. And basically, I guess I'm still not clear why this whole idea of equal representation seems to be antithetical to, what you're all trying to do, moving forward, working together. Everyone is concerned about everyone else. So yes, and yes, why is the idea of having equal representation of the two entities somehow against everything else? Because that's the impression I'm getting from a number of people.
I think our last joint meeting, we talked about long-term goal, like what Jerry was saying, long-term, being one municipality with one board, and with addressing that representation issue. And maybe it's just about timing. thinking about when to do that. Maybe doing that earlier than later might be the way to go, so that, we can have that addressed earlier in the process. But if the charter doesn't allow you to appoint representatives that haven't been elected, you don't want to be violating the charter. But that doesn't mean you can't change the charter to enable that.
Exactly.
And that would be the way to go. You gotta stay legal, Yep, Evan.
And I would venture to say that that's part of the work of this group.
Yes.
And when you talk about your work plan, to bring it full circle, is to have this discussion. And I would pose that you could probably spend more than 2 hours on just this topic.
Yes.
Which you're gonna get close to soon.
Yeah.
But it's this topic and tax equity, representation, tax equity, that's your work plan. Staff is going to shoulder a load at the staff level, with your guidance, of course, but, how we align, what we're aligning, what we're trying to do, what we can share, what we can, align, share, consolidate, and then be ready for merger, should it happen. And I know some people don't like to hear this, but even if someday you don't merge, but you're aligned, and you're sharing, and you're being good stewards of the tax money of the village and of the town, you have taken this so far. And maybe, to Jerry's point, to use an audience member, 25 years from now, somebody comes up with a better mousetrap, or the issue of the day compels you to do the full merger. Fine, you'll be ready for it. You'll be so much closer than you have been. So that's the thing. So I would say, and I love this conversation and stuff, that's your work plan.
Yeah.
And it's been spelled out for the most part. And when we asked you for your top priorities, if you look on your list, you'll see that those always tend to be in the top 5. Tax equity, representation,
Voting process.
Pardon?
Voting.
The voting process, public engagement, they all seem to come right to the top. Whether they're somebody's first, third, fourth, they're right in there. So I just say, this is just my thing, pick the things in your topics, and in these meetings, have your discussions. George, you had a very good, interesting concept in one of your answers. I believe Irene, some of her positions are right in line with some of those things, but it's a matter of timing.
Yep.
And how you get from where you are today to where you want to get to when you get time for that big vote out into the public. That's what I think is really at issues. How do you get from where you are today in today's charter into tomorrow in a charter change? And then maybe, everybody said they only wanted one charter change. You may need an intermediate step and get there and then get for the big change. And that's just from an outsider.
Thank you, Evan.
Just one last quick comment.
Yes.
Your name, sir?
Mark Banks. And I want to say that I appreciate and value different points of view in public discussion, especially when they're respectfully made. I think both Irene and George accomplished that. And I don't care if it's the second time it's come up in meeting, third time, fourth time. I think there's always value in sharpening your thinking about those issues. That comes through confrontation, respectful confrontation again. And I, as a member of the community, appreciate that, and I hope that continues rather than get stopped in some fashion.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I have one other point to make. It's become clear, Rich Margiano, it's become clear from this discussion that the charter needs to change. It needs to change. I live outside the village, and I do not have adequate representation, nor does anyone else in the TOV on this board. There are one board that represents everyone in the town, and one board that only represents part of the town. And that has to be different in order for this to go forward. I've wanted to see consolidation for the 30-odd years that I've lived here, and it will not proceed unless there are equal voices at the table. And there haven't been, there needs to be. So if the first change has to be a charter change to make that happen, then that's what you need to do.
Yes, ma'am.
Mary Lou Hurley. I agree with you. So I would recommend, the first thing to be done is amend the charter, make it equal representation, and it's gonna make everything else just flow so much more easily.
Okay, should we move on? We're gonna move on to the next item? To the next.
Did we actually answer the first one, I guess?
Did we, I don't know.
Yeah,
You wanna-
can I make another comment? Yeah, I'd like to say that I fully support Evan's proposal for the staff work plan. I think it's an excellent
Okay.
proposal, and want to make sure that he sees that, he hears that. And please continue that work. And I think that most of what we consider the select board work plan is kind of divvied up in the rest of the agenda, so it's harder to discuss. So I just at least wanted to comment on that.
Yeah, let me go back over that, because I don't want to skip over that. So, everyone happy? Any additional further comments about the staff alignment plan? I mean, it's general right now, and I think it's gonna get more specific, and I'm gonna imagine with the evaluation process, it'll get even more specific.
Evolve as
Yeah.
you get more understanding.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, so now we can move on. Do you want to do this one, Max?
So,
How many use words?
item 6C is, we all use words like tax, equity, and culture, and a number of terms that we don't necessarily all, we think they mean one thing to everybody, but they may mean different things to folks. So we identified a number of words that need to be defined. So the homework assignment that was given was to put what we believe, each of us, the definition is of these words. It was consolidation, culture, governance, identity, levels of service, and quite a few of them. And reading over the definitions, you can see that, yeah, they do mean some different things to different people, and I've experienced that in my work life too. When you work with people from different cultures, you can use the same word, but they sure don't necessarily mean the same. They're similar, but they don't mean exactly the same. So, in order to make sure that when we're using words, which are very powerful, that everybody understands what that represents. So, because again, the homework came back and there's a lot of ideas as to what these things might mean, that the thought was we could have one more subcommittee to take these multitude of ideas for what the word should be and come up with something that's a hybrid of some sort that the subcommittee could agree on, that they could then come back and propose these definitions to the larger board. Rather than try to wordsmith things with the 9 of us here, I think it would take a meeting in and of itself, so.
More than that.
Yeah, or more, so
Excruciating.
would that be okay way to proceed? If we could do one more subcommittee of people who are very passionate about words. I know Andy doesn't want to do it. Andy?
I'm concerned that we're going to have to use other words to describe these words, and it's going to could potentially turn into a complete rat hole of defining the definitions, just, the words that are in the definitions as well. So I'm completely frustrated by
Okay, do you have a suggestion?
No, I don't. Well, my suggestion is that we move on and talk about the words as they come up, rather than having individuals and this group spend a lot of time trying to beforehand come up with this long list of words that are going to be described by other words that may need to also be defined.
A never-ending cycle of definition and
It's like a Dr.
syntax.
Seuss.
Okay, right.
I totally get what you're saying, Andy. I've participated in a lot of facilitated conversations, and I've led some facilitated conversations, and one of the most important exercises that groups do together when they're embarking on a conversation about something difficult is they define common terms. So I think this is the right way to go. I do think we need to define these. I'd be willing to be on that subcommittee. But I don't think it needs to be a very lengthy process, 1 or 2 meetings, and then we come back to the board with the recommended definitions.
Okay. Irene?
I found this very handy to have a glossary of each word and then who defined it as which, because I saw very different definitions, for example, for tax equity from people who live inside the village versus people who live outside the village, just as one example. So I would hate to lose any of that color. I would just like to see anybody who didn't get the homework in time to have all those definitions, or anybody else who wants to add words, or add definitions in here, and have this handy, something that we bring to every meeting, so when we talk about something, we can look up and say, okay, I recall you saying tax equity was this, do you still believe it's this? And so that we understand when somebody's talking about tax equity, how they perceive it. I don't want to lose that, because if it means different things to us now, coming up with a common definition still may not be the way that we reference it in our own lives.
Do you, okay, Lynn?
Well, that said, yes, but we have the freedom to define these words outside of the dictionary. We can define them in the context of this conversation. So, and I would think the goal of this subcommittee would be to make those definitions relevant to this conversation so that we don't lose the color.
Can I ask both of you a question? I'd like to hear you both your thoughts. I noticed in looking at them, they felt there was kind of a general, some of the words were, we took it upon ourselves to come up with our own definition, and we put a lot of our own spin, our own lot of political thoughts into it. In other words, we went on Wikipedia and defined the word, and it's, you know, I think I said for success the opposite of failure. I didn't really think a lot about that one. But so what would you, if you wanted to consolidate, which of those is valuable? Should we, I mean, do we want to have a list that actually defines, you know, according to the Merriam-Webster, or do we want to have a list that is our thoughts, our individual thoughts about what these things mean? What are both of your thoughts about it?
I'd be willing, I think it would be worthwhile to synthesize the interpretations of these words by each of the members of these two boards.
Okay.
So that we're not losing the perspective of various people. And I think if we just go with the dictionary definitions, we will lose
We'll lose
those
it, okay.
shades of opinion.
Irene?
I don't see a need to use the dictionary definition for any of these. I think if people want over time to modify their definition as they have new awareness, that would be fine, but I'd rather keep the glossary,
Okay.
you know, for portions.
Dan?
I hear what Andy's saying. I think it can get very, you know, we can start
Wordy.
trying to wordy and trying to define a word used within the definition of a particular word. But I think we're not necessarily doing this for us, we're doing this for the public.
Yeah.
And we need to do it so that the public understands it. So when they read that as what is tax equity, what is quality of life, they understand what quality of life means. Just as much as I said in the last meeting, we need to make sure the public is understanding of what's going on here and we're not misrepresenting things and not, you know, changing things so that they're bounced around different, oh, they said this, now the select board said this, the trustees said this. What's the real message here? We need to keep it concise and simple.
Okay. Thank you, Dan. Thank you.
Just to add, if I could, for what Mr. Karen just said, I think I think Andy's comment about this turning into a rat hole is entirely possible, and this, I'm going to struggle to say this exactly the way it means, but the 10 of us, or the 9 of us, are one thing. If we invite public comment, as we always do, you are going to get so many different variations, different than what the 9 of us have come up with. I'm concerned that it's going to become an OODA loop, where we just continually chase our tail. I do not want to not invite public comment, but there has to be a point where it ends.
You talking about for a subcommittee, public comment, to Smith to define these words?
No, I'm not necessarily thinking of that. I think in order to move the process along, I think the subcommittee needs to do their work. But at some point, the public is going to need to weigh in, and we need to invite that. But like I said, Ms. Banks may have one flavor of the word culture, and there could be 3 or 4 other different ones, all different than what we've got here. None of them are wrong. It's just that it's gonna muddy the waters something fierce, and it's gonna slow us down.
Andrew?
I'm on the same page of Andy, the thought of having a subcommittee to do that kind of work. Like, I see it just being a giant wheel continuously spinning. At the same time, I don't think we can really come together and really be on the same playing field unless we have a common language and a common understanding.
Okay.
Similarly, I really see us struggling to get to a common end goal.
Well, how about, Elaine, would someone, we can't have a subcommittee of one, who else would be on the subcommittee? And would you be on the, as a trustee or a selectman on this subcommittee?
I think as a selectman would be appropriate.
Okay. I could volunteer to be on it, but Irene, do you want to participate in this as well? But that would be, let me see, that may be interesting, how that puts us in an interesting position. Wow. So you could participate as a trustee and a selectman with Irene and I. It'd be a 4-person.
Well, why don't we have Elaine do it as a trustee and Irene do it as a selectman, and just have the 2 of them do it?
Is that good?
That's fine.
Would that be all right?
And let me get to the I just had a thought what you're talking about, and I get it, I get what you guys are saying. But why don't we let's see what they come up with, bring it by the board, then we agree with it, and then let's see what the public says at that point, and then we can revise it accordingly. Does that make sense as a process?
It does.
I
Yeah?
think having a common language is important,
Okay.
not just for us, but for the public.
Okay.
And it may be that of this group of words, that there's a handful of them that are much more important to define because there's much more confusion around them
Okay.
than others. I think we can all, get around the concept of a couple of those words.
Okay. Evan has a,
Yeah, just, I again, enjoyed the commentary and I enjoyed the definition in common language. I throw this out that 6 months from now, you could ask to revisit these same words and see if they're still valid, see if they need to be tweaked, see if the public has given you anything that makes you think slightly differently or differently. You may do that, but at least you're playing off the same playbook.
okay.
And when you say this, it means this. If you were using the word in a different way, you might get somebody to go, wait, that's not what we agreed upon. What are you talking about now?
Okay. Good comment.
Just curious, if we're gonna take this language, these words, and are we ultimately looking to incorporate these into a potential new charter? And then you're gonna have to take in the fact that you're gonna have legalese and you're gonna have legal, so this is only, just in the process,
Yeah.
during the process, it's just our
Just
process.
internal
Right,
process
right.
for us.
Just wanna make it clear for everyone, it's not gonna be held to these.
And just one more moment, I did this with the staff. We had a bunch of same words, when we're talking about alignment, we wanted our definitions of what we meant by certain topics. What did this word mean, what does this word mean? So that when we go out to the departments and to the employees, when we say X word, this is what we're talking about.
You've already done that?
Yeah.
Can we see it?
No.
I mean, it sounds like that work may have already been done.
But that's what it meant,
Right.
but that's what it meant to us.
But it
Yes,
should
we
be
have
the
to
same. I mean,
Some of these, I'll be happy to, we didn't use some of these words.
Well, right, it
But
might
we
not be the
also,
same ones.
again, we wanted to define success.
but if you're defining alignment for the staff a certain way, and then we come back with a totally different definition, not okay. So we want to be on the same page as the staff.
The word alignment's not on.
Excuse me, consolidation. But my point is, we should all be speaking
But
the
yeah,
same language,
so-
not just us.
And we had 9 or 10 people in the room. It took us a good hour and a half to go through all of them. But we had also had some people pre-words, bring it together, then we commented on it.
Okay. Okay. I'll take, anyone in the audience have a comment, question about this? We're all good?
I'm just gonna throw
Yes,
one word,
Mark.
Mark, thanks again. The one word that's missing that I think might be a unifying term to define is community. We talk about consolidation, we talk about, a lot of other things, sense of place, aspects of community perhaps, but I think that's a vital word if we're thinking about living in Essex as a community.
Yeah, I'm surprised it's not in there.
Yeah,
I
me
thought-
too.
We have culture, but we don't
Okay,
have-
well, then, anyone, you want to add it?
Yes. we do.
Okay,
Sure.
yes,
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
Rich. Yes, Rich.
That's Rich Margiani again. I make my living as a professional communicator. I work a lot with technical documents. A lot of what you're saying sounds like you're trying to create a glossary of sorts. There are many terms, I work a lot in the energy industry, and there are many terms that can mean a number of different things. It's just how they're applied in certain circumstances. Just think of the different sizes of electric utilities. But saying that, a definition or a glossary, how you define certain terms, depends on what you're trying to do with them. And is everyone here clear about, is there an ultimate goal that we're trying to achieve?
Yeah.
And it's, can you state that, Max?
Yeah, I think as, I'm sorry.
Yeah, we talked about it at our last joint meeting. It was the long-term view, and we didn't say how many years that is for one community, and one municipality, and one board. So these words, as we talk about the process on this journey, we're just trying to come to a common language.
So there's no more, there will be no more that goal is achieved, TOB and TIB and all that.
As a vision for the future, yeah. And again, Rich, we haven't talked about time frame, but yeah.
Okay, there doesn't need to be that clear a time frame. But the way you define these words depends on where you're going with them.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions? Okay, so I will make a motion that we appoint Elaine Sopchak to represent the trustees on the subcommittee looking at the integration and definition of the words.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
Okay, and I entertain a motion to appoint Irene Renner to the subcommittee that defines the commonly used words around governance and consolidation.
So moved.
Thank you, Mike. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Andy. Any further discussion about appointing Irene to that subcommittee meeting? Subcommittee. Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, motion passes 5-0. Thank you, Irene, for stepping forward for that as well.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Elaine, for doing that.
Okay. You want
Yeah, I'll do the, item D is,
G.
I'm sorry, we're skipping down to G now. Thank you, Max. Thanks, I would plow right ahead. So now we have discussion about general ideas for governance and representation. That's me and you leading this. Do you want to lead off on this, or do you want me to do it? And we can sort of also open the floor.
Why don't you lead off on this one? You had,
Okay.
you want to just, jump right to the input? You had an idea?
I had an idea. It was I was being a little facetious, saying it was an excellent, amazing idea that was going to solve all of our problems. But I did want us to put an idea out there so we could begin to have a discussion about it. My idea, probably, if someone could, Lauren, could you get it? Do you have the illustration I made? My idea, and it needs a lot of work, was a charter change, a recommendation for a charter change sooner rather than later. Which would amend the two existing charters but not abolish them. And it would say that each charter is to be executed by ultimately a 7-member council made up of
basically former trustees and selectmen, but moving to a point where you would get 3 people maybe from a town district, 3 people maybe from a village district, and 1 at large. But that's down the road. My immediate thought was, if we could get this charter proposal to the legislature this year, this is all hypothetical, and it's got a lot of work to do, and it was enforceable by July of 2019, then all the existing, all the current holders of seats in the village, on the village trustees and the select board would be formed or unified into this council, and it would become the council's responsibility to execute both the existing charters. Now, why did I suggest this idea? First of all, staff has said they need several years to do alignment and policy alignment, procedural alignment correctly, to do best practices and go through it carefully and do it the way I think we all want it done. So that's several years. Secondly, if we try to do a charter, we have to understand, and I think all of us do, but it's important for everyone to understand, the charters are the glue that holds the whole communities, both these communities together. They enable and designate a taxing body. The entity that owns the assets, the charter designates who they are. The charter holds everything together. And so if you dissolve a charter, you better have some place for all that stuff to go. And we don't have a place for that stuff to go. We're saying it's going to take several years to figure out where all that stuff to go is. But in the meantime, are we going to keep meeting as 2 boards, doing our usual 2 meetings per month to handle our own stuff, and then also meeting once a month or whatever as joint meetings in order to have an up-tempo way of moving this whole alignment and governance discussion forward? Doing something like this means that we just have 1 board. It would just be the 9 of us. It would be, and we would execute the village charter, we would execute the town charter, we would meet twice a month, we would do our regular duties, and then we could also talk about all this governance stuff, alignment and tax equity and representation, and we could deal with it piece by piece and support all the subcommittees that might be formed. It would cut staff work time in half, I believe. I'm not sure it would cut it in half, but I think it would be significant diminishment of staff work time. We could even begin to look at things, and this might be a possibility right now, of having 1 annual meeting, 1 budget, 1 vote. We might even be able to align a vote if we had the village and the town lined up on the same day to have it go with the school. So we could conceivably, within a year or 2 years, have all of our votes, something all of us have said we should do. We could have all our votes on 1 day. We could have 1 annual meeting. I'm trying to think of all the other benefits, and we can get into the discussion. I didn't want this to become the focal point of this meeting. I think it's something that, it's just a concept. I wanted to throw it out there, something for us to entertain. The 2 big hurdles that I see are that, and let me anticipate, there are lots of them, but the 2 biggest ones are, it would mean the trustees suddenly are joining with the select board in executing the town charter. The trustees had not been elected to a board to execute the town charter, and suddenly we would be doing that. So that's a hurdle. Conversely, it would mean that 3 people who do not live in the village, who do not pay taxes to the village, who are not village citizens, who currently could not serve on the village board of trustees, would suddenly be able to execute the village charter. That's unprecedented. Both those things are hurdles to get over, but it would mean we have to trust each other. We have to take a leap into the dark. We have to be willing to say, we're going to give this a shot. And if we both said, as we did at our last meeting, that we ultimately see a consolidated board as the goal, well, let's see what works. Let's see if that might not work. Let's try going with the consolidated board. And when we consolidate the board, and suddenly the trustees are looking at all the things that the town needs to look at, like representation, and suddenly when the selectmen are looking at all the things that the trustees need to look like tax equity, suddenly our perspectives change. Suddenly we begin to understand each other a little bit better, and we keep the conversation moving forward. A lot of questions about it, and it was an idea that would need a lot of work, but I wanted to throw it out as a concept.
Could help address when it comes to really talking about tax equity.
Absolutely.
If there was the one, yeah, together.
Andy?
I think you say this is a temporary realignment? Is it, so what would?
The end goal would be that I would see is that this council, this realigned council would have some, over a period of like 2 years or so, understand that they're working towards a final consolidated solution. And what that solution looks like and is, I don't think any of us can say. If we could, then we'd know. But the idea is that it would be a temporary realignment of the two boards. And I think you might need to do that because the legislature, in looking at something like this, might say, yeah, we can go with that for a little while, but as a permanent solution, we're not on board with this. Yeah.
Could we consider doing it as a UMD instead of a charter change?
A UMD?
A Union Municipal District. And then you'd have an election to form it. The election would include appointing all of the current members. You could include those. And I don't know, we're kind of jumping down to the last item on the list is what is it legal to do, right?
Well,
But since it's a temporary thing, rather than, and the thing I worry about with making it a temporary charter change is that we get to that point and never step away from it. And it takes another 10
Gotcha.
years to move to the final thing. And I recognize it could easily be 5 years.
Right.
But if we're a UMD that has, ways to get out of it, for one thing, included if it doesn't work. I know there were prior discussions about UMDs and STDs, and so I'm just want to throw that out there as a possibility if it's a temporary thing.
Well, my first thought of it just is, and I think it's let's discuss it more, but my only thought about it is that a UMD is creating a new level of a separate government.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know what you do with the existing charters. Each charter requires that you have a representative body to execute the charter. And so I don't know if you could have the village and the town charters designate a UMD that executes the charters. I mean, I'm trying to do the simple, I'm taking the path of least resistance to get this. You see what I'm saying?
That's the last thing on our list is where do we need to get expert help?
Yeah.
And, municipalities have the right to negotiate with other municipalities to provide services. And so if the two
It's a good
municipalities
idea.
negotiate with each other to have a single council govern them, it may be unusual, but there may be reasons why you can't do it, I don't know.
I don't know. Evan?
And that's a great segue, Andy. I think that one of the things that we kind of kicked around, when we met earlier today a little, is that maybe when you have a discussion on something like this, we have either the village attorney, the town attorney, or a special attorney present to be able to address these questions, so that we're not doing things in the dark. We actually have an expert, that's not me, that says, oh yeah, this is something you could do. And by the way, I apologize, but you're using acronyms.
Okay.
STD. and-
Union Municipal District, Special Tax District are the two
I know.
terms that have been used,
I
so
know.
my apologies, yeah.
But the people at home may not,
Yes.
and the audience may not. So, Union
Municipal District, it's enabled by state legislation that you can negotiate agreements between municipalities.
So while you're not gonna solve it tonight,
Right.
but the idea is that if you wanna continue some discussions of some areas, we would then schedule a legal authority to be present to be able to answer questions directly while you're here.
Right.
So that you can get to the heart of the matter.
Well, you may want to, they may not be able to answer your question on the spot. You might want to give it to them ahead of time and have them come and explain why it's a bad idea, it's not gonna work.
Right.
You don't know.
I might also recommend we invite someone from the League of Cities and Towns to balance out the local attorney with someone who focuses on that law statewide every day.
Yeah, and I mean, the other advantage is that you can start to address these tougher issues if you have that equal representation piece. earlier, we talked about wanting to do this later, but maybe it makes sense to flip it and do it earlier so that these other conversations can happen.
Jim?
I don't think this is uncharted territory. I think if we look around the state, you can see other communities that have done similar things. When you go down to Bellows Falls, or you go to Waterbury, or you go up to St. Albans, I can speak to a bunch of them that I've seen that have accomplished things similar to it. Maybe not exactly the same, but very similar. So there is, you know, information or sources, like Elaine was mentioning, going to the VLCT, Vermont League of Cities and Towns, for ideas and support and to give us recommendations, maybe, whatever. It's
Mike?
As someone who was against a series of small charter changes right away, and instead having something of substance that we could bring to the legislature, I like this idea. I'm willing to give this a try and go down the road and see if we can make this work, because it solves the unending discussion of representation. And by having that resolved, we can then move to the topics that the townspeople and the village people pay us to take care of, instead of continually batting around the same ideas. So I'm not afraid to say that I've changed my position. I think a change sooner rather than later would be a good idea for this particular piece.
Good, thank you. Thanks, Mike. Irene, Andrew?
After you, please.
I guess I'm just stuck on the 10-member board because it does afford all the people here to have a seat representing their geographic district at the start, or almost all the people. And I wouldn't want to lose the wisdom around this table.
The what?
I wouldn't want to lose the wisdom we have around this table. I
No.
think going down to a 7 or 9-member board right away may work in the long term, but I'd rather see 5 people from outside the
maybe
village and 5 from inside the village to start. And that way you have the equal representation, and you have all this knowledge, and you're not losing anyone or forcing someone out
Yeah.
who doesn't want
There's
to leave
institutional
at this
knowledge.
exciting
There's a
point in
lot
our
of
history. So
institutional knowledge.
I would urge us to go with the bigger board rather than the smaller
Yeah.
one.
Yeah, I mean, again, nuts and bolts of the thing, that's something we'd have to discuss over the course of the next few months. And I think the first step would be getting legal counsel to see whether this concept or Andy's concept even is plausible under the Constitution. If it is, and Dan seems to think it is, then maybe, but let's maybe get the basics in line first and then work out the details. But Andrew, sorry, didn't mean to interrupt you.
I have to agree with what Mike was talking about, and how, as someone where I'd rather just see everything just get done
Yeah.
and move on, sometimes that just can't
Yeah.
happen, unfortunately. But this would be a great step. This would be a great way to solve so many of the issues that we aren't getting past, so that we can finally address some of the larger issues. At the same time, board compositions, my only hesitation about having an equal number of boards is, or an equal number of members, that one point in time where inevitably we're going to have a tie. In other communities, when that happens, you then have a mayor who will then preside over that and then break that vote. So then that way you can come to a resolution.
Yeah, I don't see that as a showstopper though, because I don't know how many times that might happen, but it could.
It could.
But
I'd
I
rather not see
wouldn't,
it.
I wouldn't make that be a showstopper for us, but it is good to know that that happened.
I would just say I'd rather not see us go down the road of, do we need to have a mayor, do we not need to have a mayor, but just not have there be a 10-member board, have there be an even number board.
Yeah,
So that way we don't get into that issue of stalemates.
I'd like to say 2 things about stalemates, and one is that if you've got things coming up to a board and you're voting 5-5, you've got bigger problems than an even
Yeah.
number of
So
total
yeah,
board
more-
members. We should never be that close on a vote. Second of all, I would hesitate to have at-large members. If you look around at bodies like senates and houses of representatives, they have district representation and everyone comes together and votes at large, but they do not elect at-large members. I think that's problematic. It gives one district a chance to have more weight at the table. I would not go for that.
Well, Andrew, I don't mean to put you on the spot, you were born in the town outside the village, is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, does he count as to, can he be, could he be the permanent at-large person?
It's where you pay taxes from right now.
Okay, all right. Sorry.
So this,
Oh, no worries. I brought it working, but it's okay.
He's the only native on the board then.
I understand.
What's that? No, I just, her comment was it's where you pay taxes, and it just seems like it's always coming back to taxes rather than representation, because as I'm seeing this, the town outside the village is much larger than the village. The town outside the village has unique centers, Essex Center, or Butler Corners, or down by Pinecrest. Whether all those people have the same view, are they getting equally representation on their board, their select board? They live in different parts of the town. It's unique, it's different. You can't tell me that people that live at the far end of Old State Road by Westford have the same needs or wants that somebody that lives over in Pinecrest has. It's different, so it's different for everything. So all of a sudden, this whole thing of representation has become an issue when it becomes with the village. But what about the representation within the town itself as excluding the village? So that it just gets to me after a while hearing this. It keeps coming back to that. So ultimately, it seems like it's less representation, more taxes.
Well, I mean, what do you think of just the general concept though, for right now, Dan, of saying, if we did something like this and consolidated
I support this.
And then we wrestled with the whole representation tax thing, but as a unified board going forward, knowing that those are the kinds of things we have to work on.
Is something that is moving forward. This is a big step forward. I support it, as Mike said.
Okay.
I think this would be a great way to a trial run per se. In many ways, we look at this as a marriage, or is it a civil union before the marriage, or whatever. You look at relationships, whether it's municipalities or personal relationships, but you ease into things that, you don't necessarily jump right into a marriage. You gotta look at things. People do prenuptial agreements just to make sure that the financials, so I just, not to, but I'm just saying, there's ways to go move forward. I think this is a positive direction.
Yeah, I mean.
I like prenup. I wasn't laughing at you. I'm laughing.
No, I know.
It's fabulous.
I'm trying to make it just so it's common, people understand.
I look at this as a unified board with training wheels.
Yeah.
There you go.
Exactly.
Yeah. I like that, and I wanted to just harken back to the TGIA process, which kind of stalled out recently, well, a year and a half ago, maybe, 2 years almost, because there was a sort of a lack of trust, because it was going to have one board appointing members of a commission, because not all boards had equal power.
Yep.
And what I see this doing is, as I think Mary Lou said, getting the flow going.
Yep.
That all of a sudden, if we had a unified board, then TGIA, at least the appointment part of TGIA, becomes completely moot, because all 10 of us have equal power at this table
Sure.
to talk about townwide things, and I think that's just brilliant.
Yep. Andy?
Can I bring up potential pitfalls, or?
Yeah, absolutely, I'm sure you will.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I just wasn't sure if that was agenda item.
Pitfalls
I thought that was
we're all about.
maybe the last agenda item here, but I guess one of the things we'll have to wrestle with is questions of quorum. If we have this concept of you have to be from a specific part of the town in order to be on the board representing that part of the town, there could be situations where you have 3 folks from the village and the at-large member who is making a decision. So that I'm not saying it's a problem.
No, I got you.
I'm not saying it's a problem. I just want to say that there could be perception.
Oh, there's all kinds. I think you're making good points, yeah. There's lots of bumps in here, I don't know exactly,
Yeah.
we don't have the answers yet.
That's just one thing to think about that we need to.
What's another thing? Go ahead.
The other thing is, you mentioned one budget.
Mhm.
I think there's 3, because before you unite, you're separating, okay? So, because if we do what's, I think, been proposed here, maybe I'm wrong, so maybe I'll ask the question, when you say town district, what does that mean?
I mean towards when I put it up there, that's ultimately, what I would do, where you'd go after maybe 2 years, you'd have a town district, and I don't know if you'd say specifically a town outside the village district or the existing district that is the town.
Right,
That would be a
right,
question that
right.
would have to be discussed and debated.
Right, so those
Yeah,
are,
this is just a concept, and everybody has to get the details.
Yeah.
yeah, I'm not objecting to any, I'm just trying to,
Yeah,
I'm just
gotcha,
trying to
right, gotcha.
walk through some concerns that I have in that if you go to this situation where you have a so-called town outside the district, and it's been said that there are some things that the current select board that does today that only affect individuals that are outside the village, do you then, would it be appropriate and lawful to take the portions of the budget that are only applied outside the village and have those individuals only pay it? So there's another, it's a,
Yeah,
you hear what I'm saying?
I know what you're saying, that they're-
Because then at that point, if you have a town outside the village district voting on a town budget, I guess I'm gonna get all twisted up here because it gets.
It's got a lot to.
It's a
Right,
lot of
because
reasons.
what's considered today the town budget would be voted on by a different set of people. They're all town residents, of course.
Mhm.
But my question, I guess, ultimately is, do you end up then in some transition point here, as you're working toward tax equity with a general town budget, which includes the police, for example, a town inside the village and a town outside the village budget, 3 separate budgets because of what's being, how people are represented and what services are provided to those individuals.
Well, I would say.
And then,
Yeah.
do you then have another quorum question of who gets to decide the town inside the village budget and the town outside the village budget? Is it everybody or only the representatives from that area?
Well, I think we're getting a little, I think just for the immediate concept, the budgets would stay, the village budget as it is right now would stay as it is right now, and the town budget as it is right now would stay as it is now, given the routine of changes and so forth. But you wouldn't be any change in, at least for the first year, and then the very questions you're wrestling with are the questions that this council, that we would, but as this council would wrestle with.
Elaine, you had your hand up, did you want to add something?
No, I didn't.
You're okay.
Yeah, I'm good.
Well, I think that's something that one of our experts needs to
Yeah.
tell us which way is the legal way to do it.
Right, it has to be.
Yeah.
And I think when I proposed this about a month ago, my idea of having the 5 different representatives from the 2 different districts was that because the village has things like a recreation district right now that it needs to manage, it could vote as those 5 people within the auspices of the council, as we do here. You know, you can warn a separate
Right.
discussion for the trustees, you could warn a separate vote for whatever that subset is
Yes,
called.
that's right.
They could act on something before or after the rest of the meeting, and the same thing with the outside the village representatives could warn and vote on things. But the 95% of what we're doing at the table every week, all 10 of us, would be the town's business. And I think that, again, if it can be legal, would be a way to maintain what we need to maintain until we bring everything together.
Right, this would be a temporary, road.
Or however long it needs to be temporary,
However long it
right?
needs to be temporary.
Yeah.
But the goal would be to get to that
But
point.
we've eliminated then all the village trustee meetings because you're meeting within the context of the council. And the select board is meeting within the context of being the council or
Yeah.
whatever.
So at the beginning of the meeting, like if this was enacted, at the beginning of the meeting, we would do like we did here. We would open up the trustee meeting, we would open up the select board meeting, but then we would all be equally, have an equal vote on the decisions coming before that council. And they would be spending and policy decisions for the village, and they would be spending and policy decisions for the town. Yeah.
I still have a mental block with that concept because, in my opinion, there is almost nothing, if not nothing, that the town votes on that the village doesn't have something to do with. Even if it's the budget for the town cemetery, there might be someone who lives in the village who wants to serve on the town cemetery. I mean, I still struggle with the idea of a separate district for the town just voting on certain things for the town because the village still pays for all of that. So I don't want to get in the weeds now, but I'm just struggling with that. I don't see it.
I understood. The problem too, that's the crux of the issue. But are we in a better position to solve that doing this, taking this step first?
Oh, yeah,
Does it change our
absolutely.
perspective and give us a better understanding of how to solve this?
Is it perfect? Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right.
Andy?
So, I guess to respond to that, maybe I wasn't clear on what I was saying, is that if there are, I understand that right now, I absolutely understand that folks in the village pay the town tax rate. The question is that if there are things that, would it be appropriate to take some of that load and shove it back outside the village? Is the question. If you've got representation that's specific to outside the village, they should have the opportunity to vote for things that they want to pay for that you don't. They should have the right to generate their own and add their own budget items, just like you do.
But then as
Right, so the village can vote to put up a new flagpole anywhere they want. People outside the village should also be able to vote to put up a flagpole anywhere they want and pay for it themselves, and not ask you to pay for it. So that's why I'm saying, you need to have the opportunity, if you're gonna retain the right the village is gonna retain the right to spend their own money, tax themselves and spend money the way they want to. Folks outside the village have to also have the right, if you're gonna do representation that way, to vote to tax themselves and spend the money that they want to. And then you will also have a townwide budgets. That's why I'm saying there's 3 budgets.
Can I just
I'm not sure who was, yeah.
Can I respond to that?
Yeah.
So, now I understand what you're saying, and I get that. What that sounds like to me is a single town with 2 incorporated villages.
Yes.
And is that even a thing legally? What I would rather see is one budget.
Yep.
And we don't have a recreation district, we have a rec department, and we don't have a library district, we have a library department, so we're identical in that respect to the town. So I would much rather make it less complicated and not have,
Gotcha.
I wouldn't wanna take a temporary, super complicated step, and then the next step be the simple one.
Yeah.
I would rather do the work up front to get to the simple one. So that's all.
Gotcha, I got you, understood. Irene?
But in the meantime, there are still departments and ordinances and things that apply only to outside the village, which have been for so long forsaken, and so isn't this an appropriate time to recognize those and to deal with them?
And we just
whatever
passed an
way,
ordinance
whatever they
tonight that's
are.
only for the village.
Exactly.
Now, if we suddenly consolidated, what happens? No one in the town is the town gonna follow that ordinance?
We already
Or
have,
are
we
gonna
have,
do
already have our
something?
own.
But they would have to be.
We have our own.
We would have to align all the ordinances,
That's all
all
I'm
the
saying, you got
codes.
a ton of that stuff.
Right.
And
All I was gonna say, I think that if we're going back to our last meeting and how we talked about one board, one community, I was inferring from that one budget, one voting community ultimately. If that's where we're moving towards, then we just need to keep in mind, that's what we've already talked about. And so in the conversations with the experts, the lawyers, whoever it's gonna be, I think it's how do we use this as an intermediary, or an intermediate step to get us towards that point. And so if what the expert says is, well, the only way you can do this is by having a whole new municipality with a whole new budget, then that might be going against what we talked about, and so then maybe that's not the best way to go. But I think we need the experts before we continue going down the rabbit hole.
bingo.
Right, but the idea is just this overall concept to say, let's see if we
Let's
can
see
do
what
this
we can do.
sooner, so that we can have these
Yes.
more difficult conversations together as one board.
After hearing from an expert about whether that's gonna help us
Is it
get
possible?
towards our end goal versus further separating.
Want to throw it over to the public?
Yeah, is there anyone from the public that would like to speak on this topic? I saw Jerry's hand, so Jerry?
Ooh, sorry, Jerry.
Senility.
No, it's those village chairs, they just sometimes tip over.
Glad you didn't
So
call.
excited about what I want to say. There really is ample example, precedent for what you want to do. Burlington has districts,
Yeah,
but the Burlington Council works on the city budget.
yeah.
That's right.
So that's really what you're talking about here.
Yeah.
So there's ample, okay, what scares me about this is that it perpetuates the current situation. And it flies in the face of what our goal was that we expressed last time of one vote, one town, one budget, one voting at large. How you sunset this is scary, because if you say it can only last 3 years, well, it might take 5. On the other hand, if it's gonna take 5, how do you provide for that in the way it sunsets? It doesn't go 50. That's the part that
Yep,
scares me.
I got you. Good point.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Other comments? So can I, I'm sorry, Iris, okay.
Iris Banks?
Yes.
So I think that's really a good idea, it's positive, and I think what's been said, or Andy said, I guess, that 5 and 5, but you are all agreeing on the larger goals, so I think it's a plus to be working together, and I think it might get you there sooner, really.
Right, appreciate it.
So,
Yep,
that's
thank
it.
you, Iris. Okay, anybody else? Rich?
It's very interesting what's transpired here, and I'm happy to see it. But you shouldn't be deterred by the fact that you might have an even number of people on a board. The last, not even really negotiations I've been involved in, involved solar panel installers and utilities, and they had to come to an agreement. And there were an even number of people on each side. And it wasn't supposed to be 11-9. Everyone had to agree on everything to move forward, because it wasn't about them. It was about the community and delivering electricity and meeting state statutes and all of that. So the fact that you have 10 people, your votes shouldn't be 6-4. They should be 10-0. You should come to a decision.
Ideally, yeah. Great. Thank you, thank you. Okay, hearing no other, if any other comments, but I'd like to, I think that the point of this was achieved, which was to stimulate conversation and get us thinking about something in specific. So what I think Evan said, this obviously deserves its own meeting to really get into the nuts and bolts and what it does immediately, what it would do down the road, how it would work, so forth and so on. So why don't we schedule a future meeting for further discussion? We'll table discussion about this for now, and in the meantime, and maybe we could do a little preliminary legal work on Andy's idea about a UMD, and also the concept that I presented of having, would the charters allow this to happen, the existing charters allow this to be amended this way, and then have someone from VLCT and maybe a co-board of lawyers come and sit with us and talk about this, and it'll be expensive, but well worth it. Yeah.
Are you thinking about our next meeting on the 14th
I'm
of
not
June,
sure.
or do you
What do you
mean
think?
sooner than that?
You think sooner? I don't know. I don't know. Evan says yes.
I'd like to give the
Evan
audience
says no.
an idea of when they might come back, you know, I mean, it's exciting, you don't wanna miss the next installment.
I know, but it is going to be hard to get people lined up for a meeting.
Sure.
That's, I need to line people up. So I would venture to say it could be certainly the July meeting or something like that, but I need to get.
We don't have a July meeting, I know of.
Let's let it incubate and think about it, and use Doodle, and maybe we can get something going sooner than that. Does that sound good?
It could be, but I want to make sure the VLCT reps can come and talk and,
So you could do the preliminary homework to see about VLCT and the attorneys, what might work for them, and then we could do a doodle around some days? Okay. Great.
Okay.
Quick question, do we not wanna ask our village and town attorneys separately to do the homework on this concept? It sounded like we all just talked about how it.
Yeah, no, that's what I'm saying. I
That's
think
what
we
I
should.
meant.
I think we should. And Andy had a concept about saying, well, how about if we created a union municipal district that served the two charters? Is that what you're saying, Andy?
Sorry, I thought I understood what you were saying is only looking at the union municipal
No,
district.
no,
stuff
the two
okay.
concepts, and giving opinions about each and what's more effective and that sort of thing. Yeah, and Dan?
I think, like I said before, I think it's great. I hear what you're saying, but I also look into the audience here and looking at Lauren, and I look at it from a financial standpoint, accounting standpoint. It is a nightmare, I think. It is the ultimate storm, to try and, what Andy was talking about, a union municipal district, whatever, but to separate and decide, if for tax purposes, I'm assuming when you were talking about that, the people in the village outside of, or the town outside the village, having a separate tax you know, for projects they're gonna do outside of the village,
Right.
and they vote on that, so it affects them different, so that, I assume that's what you're talking, the tax equity aspect of it would be accomplished in that way?
I mean, it's a possible way to do it. That's not where I want to go.
Okay, I
All I'm
was just
saying is,
curious.
and the whole question is, if you change how representation is, you have
Right.
to have the same
Then you
rights
change it.
inside the village as outside the village.
Right, exactly.
But I think for right now, in terms of Lauren's workload, it would be the same. If you keep the two charters, then you've got two separate budgets. But I think it would streamline it in the sense that you might, the budget deliberation process of the boards could be streamlined, and it could certainly be streamlined for staff, because they'd only have to go through it once. They wouldn't have to be servicing two different boards. Lauren, the budget preparation would, under this immediate model, would be the same, because you've got two charters, they both need their own budget. So nothing's changed, nothing's different. And by the way, the other selling point is it doesn't solve tax equity, so no one's taxes are
Okay.
going up or down. Everyone's taxes are gonna stay the same.
That's where I just misinterpreted
Ultimately, yes,
Andy's
but-
scenario. I just misinterpreted that as being, when he gave the comparison or the analogy of somebody, they want to put a flagpole up outside.
Yep.
And I assume that the funds to pay for that will be the funds set aside for that, because he said 3 budgets.
Yeah.
So out of the budget for the town outside the village,
Yeah.
and not impact the town within the village.
But we're not there yet.
Right, right. I'm just-
Yeah, we're not there yet.
Right,
There's clearly
exactly.
gonna be a
Right,
bunch of
right.
things, scary things to have to deal with.
Right.
The overall concept, though, is let's see if we can get together to really work on the tough questions.
Yeah.
They're gonna be plenty.
Irene?
I think the residual highway tax, if we don't immediately get rid of it, could pay for quite a few flagpoles.
That's true.
Because we're already collecting separate taxes from outside the village residents, we just are careless about acknowledging it.
Elaine?
We had a topic about areas where experts should be hired, and I think the other expert that I recommended, besides a governance expert, is somebody to help us with the finances, somebody who can look at the taxation structure, the revenue, the expenses, and just say, okay, here's some places where you can adjust, and here's some places where you are gonna have to do something creative. Somebody who, I don't think anybody in this room has the expertise
No.
to work with us on the finances in such a way as to establish tax equity from the mathematical standpoint. So I would ask that,
Yeah.
once this, if we go to this first,
Yep.
and it could be possible if we start the public works conversation that we bring that person in. But that's the other area that I feel like we don't have any expertise in the room.
Yep.
And need a lot of help.
Agreed. And I just want to mention, I was supposed to have handed this out at the beginning of the meeting. I am sorry. It's Evan's illustration of much. Yeah, does this still work with this?
Yes.
Okay.
Somewhat.
Yeah, somewhat with this. So this was Evan, when we came up, we discussed this earlier. So, yeah.
Just
this sort of setup.
something to think about.
It's a concept that goes with this concept.
If I might.
Yep.
I would like to refrain from what will be easier or harder or whatever right now. This concept was in a pocket on Friday.
Yeah.
It has not been reviewed in any way, shape, or form
Okay.
for its efficiency, effectiveness, legal ability. It's a very excellent, every word you used in your, it's a good concept. It's a great discussion. I have no idea today what its impact is to the staff that have to administer it. Haven't had 6 minutes to look at it.
Yep.
And back to consultants, as part of the discussion with anybody like League of Cities, legal counsel or a finance expert, that's what I would ask them to do. What does this do to us? And what does it mean? Because as we see with consolidations and things, sometimes something gets lost in a translation or a word in a charter, and it ends up doing something you didn't want it to do. I want to make sure that as we go through this, we understand with our legal experts and people that it is in fact what we expected it to do, not something else, that's all. So we took, I met with George earlier today and Max, we tend to try to get together to go over meetings, and George was kind enough to give us a preview of this concept, and then we tried to put it into a graphic. And the real idea was that this is something you could take home, think about. As you notice, on the back, there's a bunch of pros, but we didn't do cons. People can think about this and add those, because again, I want to make sure we are talking about the same things.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, we're really just talking about phase one tonight.
Yeah.
We're talking about phase one, and then what happens after that, we'll see.
Can we move on?
Yep.
Okay, so that was,
And so we
so we want to talk about the priorities?
Yeah.
Discuss, discussion about the tech.
Sorry.
Yeah.
We only talked about one possibility, right? About how to go forward.
Yes, yep. We did, you want to talk about more?
Yeah.
Well, another possibility is to continue on as we are and run the alignment that Evan has proposed. And as things become aligned, I think there will be things that will be more easily consolidated, that we can then shuffle budgets around appropriately. And we could. I mean, it certainly is a valid alternative to continue on the way we are, and I recognize that there are, this seems to have raised a lot of excitement here tonight as a way to get to potentially accelerate things, but I don't want to discount the possibility of doing it more slowly.
Yep.
Yeah, it just doesn't address the representation piece, which this other concept would, at least get to.
It could if it's, it depends on how it all shakes out.
Yeah,
But-
it's not allowed.
If I could jump in, the reason the problem I'm having, like, let's say right now, we're working on public works consolidation, okay? But public works, the village public works employees are part of the village association. They work for the village of Essex Junction.
Right.
And town works for the town of Essex.
Yep.
Their trucks and equipment are owned by at a certain point, you hit a brick wall in consolidation. You hit the legal wall that says these are two separate entities, and you haven't merged anything at the top. So how far can you keep going with consolidation? To be answering to a town employee, we haven't really thought about that, or a town person is now going to be taking orders from a village supervisor. That's, again, we're kind of whistling past the graveyard with some of this stuff right now, and I think to keep trying to consolidate things without addressing the more substantive issue of assets and who owns what, and I'm concerned about that. So that's why I'm thinking if you allow the two charters to continue to exist, then you get yourself some breathing room. You don't have to deal with those questions. You can do some other things. But I agree with you that this may not work, and so we do need a backup plan. We probably need several.
Right.
If I can real quick, I think what Andy's doing is as part of a brainstorm,
Yep.
throwing out another idea.
Yep.
One of which is, like in hypothesis testing, you have an option to pursue, and then you want a null to make sure that whether there could be any change. So it's.
Yep, gotcha.
Okay. Any other comments on this before we move on? Okay, so why don't we move on to the next one, which is, it's 6F on our printed agenda, which is a discussion about the top 3 priorities to be accomplished by consolidation. Is that the next one?
Yep.
Actually, no, it's identity, I'm sorry. Isn't it identity areas where it's, what's that?
It's F.
It's a,
Is it?
F?
Yeah, go ahead. Go for it.
Okay, so discussion about the top priorities to be accomplished by consolidation. So again, that was part of our homework. What was the recommendation for that? George, do you know?
We had some different ideas, and I think I thought when Max and I talked about this and thinking about the meeting is we would do
something somewhat similar to the words. We would try to consolidate them, although we haven't defined that word, but I think in this one we're just going with the traditional sense of consolidation. Consolidate the ideas into a single list and see where there's overlap and try to wordsmith it into, not to eliminate anyone's idea, anyone's priorities, but also, and I think Evan suggested, we don't do 3, maybe we do 10. We just basically just take all the things that we've said are our individual priorities and put them all into one big list. And then where there's overlap and the potential for combining some of them, do so we simplify it. But that, I don't know if that would require a subcommittee. I'm happy to do that, or I'm happy to appoint another subcommittee. So that's sort of the thought, how we would approach this. And again, this would just be a tool. It's not something that's, profound. It's not going to tell us exactly what to do, but it's just background information that we would all have. And if we say we're being respectful of each other, we would all look at these things and say, okay, these are the thoughts that we all have, and these are all the things that we want to see accomplished as we go forward. So we would have that in our back pocket going forward. Thoughts?
Comments?
Elaine?
No, I agree with that approach. I think synthesizing all of the priorities from all the different selectmen and trustees is fine. Almost all of them have the same exact thing on them with 1 or 2 different.
Yeah, it's not a big job.
I don't think it's a big job. I think maybe if someone combined them all into one document and eliminated the duplicates and we looked at it one more time, I think we'll be there.
Could I suggest that maybe staff could do this? Could you or Greg? I don't think it's I don't think we're asking for substantive changes, to just take the priorities and just put them all into one. I mean, pretty much done that already. Yeah. Is that good, everybody?
Yeah.
Everybody good?
Okay, good. We'll move on to 6D then,
Yep.
which is determine whether to establish subcommittees with missions and responsibilities around governance and consolidation.
Elaine?
I think based on what our conversation just was, it's not time for that yet. I
Yeah.
think we need to hear from experts first.
Yeah. Anyone, but there might be some other ideas. I don't want to squash if someone has another idea for some kind of another subcommittee that does something associated with all this. Anyone have any ideas? Yeah.
We could have a subcommittee of subcommittees.
We could.
You have 3 meetings before.
That's just dealing with subcommittee work. Yeah, okay.
Is this limited to governance and consolidation, or, because
Well, we already talked about the others, right?
well, I expanded a little bit on it when I submitted my homework, and I truly think we need a committee on economic development. I think on economic development, but can be done independently, concurrently, whatever. I think these boards need to come together and talk very specifically about economic development, but not within the you can't avoid talking about being consolidated when you talk about that, but it's a topic that desperately needs attention, and I know we're very preoccupied,
Right.
but at some point in time, we have to start talking about
That
this.
illustrates nicely that there's a lot of other work
Other
that
work,
still has to
yeah.
get on while we're focusing a lot of energies on this,
Yeah.
and that's certainly one.
Not to be, on a serious note, and but ripping on what Andy said, is we had talked about the idea of looking at all the existing committees and commissions that are in the town and the village right now.
Yes, we did.
The energy committee, the tree committee, the bike walk committee, the trails committee. Maybe not time to do it right now, but would it be fruitful eventually for all of us to look at all of these committees that are existing and meeting throughout the town and the village, and doing all kinds of interesting and important and worthwhile things, but maybe there'd be some opportunities, for example, the tree committee to be combined with the trails committee, because it seems like there might be some natural overlap there. It's a conversation.
Conservation.
Confrontation.
Yeah.
So those two were combined recently.
Yeah, so, thoughts about that? Does that generally seem like a good idea to do that, something like that, Irene?
I think that's a great idea, because we already have an economic development commission, and we've had a business liaison group in the past,
Right.
Yeah.
which is still hanging out on the org chart, so.
Really need
To set up a third one, to me, just seems
We
like
need to enhance the
we
one we
need to
have.
really, I
Right.
think, pull together what we've got and maybe give them more direction, or maybe they need to just talk to us more so that we know what they're doing, because I think they're working really hard.
Yeah.
But I don't wanna set up any extra committees. I think Andy's got a good idea to
Yeah.
have a committee on committees.
Why don't, if I could recommend, why don't, I think that, I noticed a lot of raised eyebrows. It's not like this, yeah, this seems good. Let's just put this on the back burner for now, and we'll talk about it, develop it a little bit more again. I couldn't even name all the committees that we have going right now in the town and the village.
So it's about aligning and possibly consolidating those.
But maybe make a list of them, and at an upcoming meeting, we go, yeah, let's get, and then we wouldn't do it. We could get those committee members to talk to each other.
And the advantage is then, we might, if there were fewer of them because they were being combined, we might be able to add staff to some of these
Yep.
to help with the workload. Right? I mean, if we can get them down to.
You mean staff presence?
Staff presence, yes, staff presence.
I'm not giving Greg Morgan a staff.
No, I'm sorry.
Just
Thank you for that.
He's asked me for that, but the answer, you know, I think staff would like to be present at these to help guide and give them perspective, and maybe, because they're not in our organization every day, what's going on in other committees that they could be aligning some of their projects with.
So if we could consolidate that, that would be an added benefit. And then actually, even when we do that, we should talk about how we can have communication between the different committees as well, because there's often overlap and synergy that we could identify. And that's feedback that I've gotten from many of the chairs of the committees, that they'd like to see more, working together for synergies. Okay. So which item is that?
We are.
We're on the last one then?
The very last one, I think. And let me take a pause here. Anyone in the audience, we're slowly losing folks, but anyone remaining in the audience have a question, comment about anything with this we've done so far? Okay, yes, Diane.
In your communication effort, the village is already sending out minutes to other committees. The guys and planning commissioner get a variety of different minutes from Patty.
Yeah.
I don't know if that reciprocal is happening in the town. Perhaps you might encourage staff to send them out to various committee members.
Yes.
So that communication is facilitated.
Good idea.
To send which minutes?
Or that vast gaggle of committees that we happen to have on the page for both the village and the town.
To send them out to the boards, and then they get into the minutes of the meetings.
Might encourage attendance at various other places other than the nightly things that I do.
Okay, thank you, Dan.
I know that, for example, Jericho has subscriptions, so I'm subscribed to their select board, I'm subscribed to their energy committee, but I can't do that in my own town. So it would be lovely if we could do that. Have subscription-based.
The village has subscription-based stuff.
Right, to get the minutes from whatever committees I signed up to get.
Can we get money for that?
It's not working for the newspapers, why should we start? But by the way, one of the things that staff is working on is looking at our website and our websites and how many we have. And
Yes, we get a lot of websites.
but also with its functionality, and one of the components is how do we do notifications and things? And so that could be part of one of the things we would look at, is having people be able to sign up for certain types of minutes. And then so instead of them always having to come to the website to download a minute, when you upload a minutes, it would then send it out to you, or give you a notification that a new set of minutes is available. Those types of things we're looking at, so.
Then if there are many websites, if there was some way to reduce that, to have a more functional one.
There's at least 5 of them.
Maybe there's some savings there that might enable, better functionality of the website.
And again, one of the things we're looking at, there's at least 5 websites. There are 5 hosting agreements. There are some issues with whether certain of them, and then when we go eventually to do, and taking money from people via the website, so you could do things remotely. We wanna make sure we have one company taking our money going to finance instead of 5 companies taking any money and all that stuff, so. And then we can unify our messages and we can unify what we're trying to get out, so. And I appreciate Rob, our IT director, working on this along with staff, with Darby and others, Greg and others, because again, we're looking at efficiency and effectiveness when we have rec out there and we have,
It's a real opportunity.
it's the Wild West of websites.
Websites, yeah.
Okay. So then, I guess we move on to our last item.
Yes.
Right, which is 6E on the agenda. Identify areas where experts should be hired to inform governance and consolidation. I guess we kind of already talked a lot about
Yeah, I
that.
think we kind of nailed that. That was, I think, the reason we transposed
Right.
these so that we'd get some of that, yeah.
Well, I agree with Andy also, the other expert we should consult with is a library.
Library.
expert, whenever it is we get there, the Department of Libraries.
Yeah, yep.
Library. So just, I've heard libraries, finance, government structure,
Tax, equity.
Taxation.
Taxation, yeah.
Assets, we're gonna deal with the assets, we can deal with
Assets.
everybody's, all the assets.
Yeah.
But you're not gonna go out and get experts on all these things right now.
No.
You're gonna, this
No,
is
no,
stuff
this
you're
is
going
just
to
thing I
do
guess
later.
I'm thinking of and
Because I don't think that's.
find some, some things as we move through this. Question for the boards. We have a town attorney, and we were soon to have a full, I'll be making a recommendation on a village attorney to take the place of Mr. Barra. Are you comfortable with them, one or the other working on issues, sometimes together, sometimes you ask one and not the other? Are you okay with that, or do you want a third person working on some of these questions that is not affiliated with town or village? That may have expertise in it. One of the firms that we interviewed but are not selecting were pretty good in this area,
Yeah.
but not so much in, they got beat out in general village, town, municipal work. But one of the things that they seemed very good at was
Yeah.
merger type stuff and things.
Yes.
And I didn't know if, people get oh, the town attorney said this versus the village attorney said this versus a neutral third that just said, I reviewed it, this is my position, take it for what you believe it's worth.
Well, that sounds like a reasonable
like that.
way to go.
Yeah.
We're looking for the right expert, we don't want one just because they're
Does that
convenient.
sound good, guys?
That's a good idea.
Yes.
I think it's a good idea.
Yeah, expertise is everything.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Okay?
Okay, good thoughts.
Any, you want to open it up to the public for this last one? Any comments about expertise that we think we may need to hire in? Okay.
Okay, hearing none. Any final thoughts, folks? We all good? We all talked out? So, we will be, the next step, we've got a meeting in June. We have to wrap, we've got some stuff there. We don't know when we're gonna continue the discussion about the models of this, but we'll try to get that on, keep that going. We wanna keep the fire going on that, so. And be thinking about it. Send in your thoughts, but remember, keep in mind, I wouldn't go too far until we get some legal opinions to even if these things are feasible. Right?
Can't go afoul of the law.
Right.
Okay?
Well, I think it was a great meeting. Again, I thought our last meeting was a good one, and if I gave offense to anybody with my strident comments, my deepest apologies, I did not mean to. But anyway, very productive, I thought.
Good discussion.
Yeah, very good.
Very civilized. So, do we need to approve the reading file?
No.
No consent.
Yeah.
It's the protocol.
It's
Okay,
not a
there's no
consent.
consent, so.
So,
I will entertain a motion that we adjourn the Essex Junction Trustees meeting.
I moved, so moved.
Sure, second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
I would move that the select board adjourn.
Thank you, Maureen. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mike. Any further discussion about adjourning? All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Fantastic.
Okay.
Thank you to the members of the audience who stuck through this.
And thank you to those members of the boards that stepped forward to be on committees. Thank you.